Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Mondays Down South. We apologize for the week break we took off, but we're excited to be back. Man, this is going to be a good day. These guys are talking UFC, which is going to be completely new for us. We have not discussed that yet. I will be sitting out of that segment as I do not have anything great to offer with UFC except for the fact that I loved Anderson Silva like 5 years ago. So that's all I will ever be able to, when it comes to that topic. After UFC, we'll also be discussing NFL schedule and what our 5 favorite matchups of the year are, a couple of rule changes, all the things that we think are going to change up how we view the NFL going forward. So we're excited about that. Before that, though, I think we should catch up because we haven't talked in 2 weeks. I want to know how you guys are doing. What's on the schedule? What are you guys doing in these quarantine times? What's up? Ev, what are you up to, man?
I'm done with the whole quarantine social distancing thing. I've shut down. I mean, our stay at home is lifted, so not in a bad way. I mean, I'm still being careful, all that good stuff. I do wear a mask, which is good when I go out to places. But I've been hanging out with friends. We're going to the beach this weekend, so we're getting plans back in the schedule and starting to come out of it a little bit. But I've just been chilling.
I would like to put up a disclaimer before we get sued that please listen to your lawmakers and stay safe and isolate. Do not use, this as your example. You decide what you need to do.
And I'll clarify further. We have been following all the guidelines because at this point we are into phase 1, which means groups, I think 10 people, and we've been below 10 people every time. So we're still following all the guidelines, but yes. I'm ready for it to be over, I guess was the point, maybe. Not that we should all be going, buck wild here.
Fully understood. Ev, which beach are you going to?
We're going to Myrtle, Dirty Myrtle.
Okay, so let's let me paint a picture for you guys, okay? I remember, however many years back, the group of 3 of us, along with some of our best friends, went to Dirty Myrtle, and we rented a house, and I'm downstairs in the basement and I walk up these stairs and having a conversation with somebody. I look to the left and I just see Zach there sitting on the couch by himself, just geeking, doing his own thing, just sipping on something. And I look over and Zach has a raspberry Mike's Hard lemonade. And first thing he says to us, this must be the first drink he's ever had. He goes, "Guys, have you ever had this stuff? Man, this stuff is the best." And here we are, like almost maybe a decade later talking, and I don't know if anything's changed, Zach, but I just wanted to say.
Yeah. 10 years later, still drinking Mike's Hard Lemonades. I'd go. I mean, they're not a sponsor. We want to just clarify here. All right, guys. So quarantine's been a little different over on my end. With unlike Raleigh and the rest of the state of North Carolina, Northern Virginia has actually extended their lockdown and their phase 1 reopening until May 29th. So everyone here is staying pretty indoors. Megan and I, so I'm over at Megan's right now. We've spent our weekends just like walking around, just trying to get out of the house, just to get some fresh air, and then we just kind of come back. We've been binge watching a ton of shows, so it's been great. But in terms of missing you guys, I'm glad we're getting back into this and really excited to start talking sports again. I know there's a couple of rumors with baseball coming back in July. I think NASCAR is getting ready to go back to everything too. So we're starting to see, some of these sport plans to get back to action and get back to normalcy. But just in terms of the sports that we're going to be talking today, there's a lot of unanswered questions. I know we're going to be focused on the UFC and NFL, so I'm excited to dive in and get right back to it.
Yeah, I'm definitely sorry, go ahead, Ev.
I was going to say, did you binge watch Outer Banks?
I did binge watch Outer Banks. It was pretty good. It was pretty good.
Whoa, no spoilers. I have not seen it yet. It's on my list. Just making sure. I'm excited to watch it, though. No, for sure. I'm on the same boat as Zach, too, with the whole being in Northern Virginia, getting extended, trying to make the most of it, playing a lot of basketball. That's like basically the how I've been killing time outside of working at home. But like you said, man, I miss sports. I'm excited that we're starting to see more sports events come up. And I know Ev and I are excited about baseball, so that's probably something we'll talk about in the near future. But I think we should jump into it and start talking. You guys should start off with the UFC segment because this could be a good full episode. So don't want to waste time here. So you guys go ahead. You guys talk about UFC. I'm gonna go on mute and just listen for a little bit.
No worry. Hey, that's fine with me. And Ev, I mean, what a great return to sports, right, for the UFC. Now, they had taken a lot of the proactive measures in place. They didn't have any audience in the stands. They, pretty much everyone had a mask on. The teams were, pretty isolated. It was just pretty much around the ring. The referee, the three sports announcers. So Joe Rogan was there because it was a UFC event, and then they just had the two corners. And this was a pretty stacked card. I know it was featuring Justin Gaethje, Tony Ferguson, Dominic Cruz, Henry Cejudo, and then they had a variety of different fights, even prelim fights like Cowboy Cerrone and Anthony Pettis. These are two guys that were main event fights in the year of 2019, or actually I guess in January 2022 with Cowboy and McGregor. So it was a stacked fight card. Did you watch it with some friends, or did you just like hang out in your apartment and watch it? Like, where were you for the UFC event?
So I actually couldn't watch it live because it was a pay-per-view, obviously. And since, obviously no bars are open, couldn't really get together with people. So I kind of did I watched all the prelims, which, like you said, stacked card. I mean, getting Cowboy and Pettis on a prelim fight is just ridiculous. So I watched that live and then went back and watched highlights and analysis and such after. I think the card lived up to the hype from what I could see. I mean, obviously, like you said, stacked card. I mean, Ngannou was another one you didn't mention there in the third fight against Rosenstruik, who I last saw live in DC and wasn't too impressed with. But great fights. I mean, even as early as the Nico Price fight, which was one of the first fights of the prelims, those guys were just destroying each other. Just honestly awesome the whole night. I guess what were your biggest takeaways in terms of, outcomes?
One of my biggest takeaways was Cowboy Cerrone was able to withstand punches and kicks for more than 20 seconds. I know with Conor McGregor, there was an early exit in the first round, and it was a big anticipated fight, so he got a lot of backlash for it. In fact, people were they thought there was some type of weird conspiracy theory behind the fact that he had done it on purpose to further promote McGregor's career, right, as he was returning to the octagon. But I thought that the fight between Pettis and Cowboy was really entertaining. I believe it went the distance, and they're good friends. Like, they actually, I'm not sure if you saw the pictures afterwards, but they were watching the fights together with, cracking a beer, just like they were clinking beers and watching the rest of the fights afterwards. So I thought that was really cool. And then obviously the Francis Ngannou fight, the name of his opponent that you mentioned is escaping me, but I do know that he was undefeated. I think he was 10-0, and Francis just lit him up like a Christmas tree. I mean, it was crazy to see Francis Ngannou, back in the octagon. I know he had kind of dealt with some psychological issues. Like, I think he needed to see like a sports psychologist because he was actually afraid. He was like more timid, didn't really want to attack, and especially in his Derrick Lewis fight. So seeing him kind of get back to the octagon, I think he's now on a 3 or 4 fight win streak, and I believe most, if not all, are knockouts. So I know that he called out John Jones. Now that could be an interesting fight in the making here. Between that fight and then also the main event with Justin Gaethje fighting incredibly intelligently, sticking to his game plan, and just taking care of Tony Ferguson after 5 rounds, I thought was also, definitely something worthy to touch on. So those were like my takeaways.
Yeah, agreed. I think Ngannou definitely made a statement. I think his name is, I can't pronounce it, but Rosenstruik or something like that. He was undefeated, but his last fight and his only real major fight was against Alistair Overeem, which he won by a knockout where he split his lip open in like the finals.
Oh, yeah.
That up in DC. But honestly, I was not impressed with him at all during that fight. I mean, that was probably the most boring fight I've ever seen in my life. They basically did nothing for 25 minutes, and then he just landed one big blow at the end and won. And I think he probably would have lost the fight in a decision. So I wasn't surprised by Ngannou. That's obviously big. Yeah, sets him up for. I think he most likely would just get the winner of Stipe DC when they're able to do that. But John Jones, that would be an interesting fight if he wanted to. I guess John would go up to heavyweight. But yeah, I think so. I mean, Cejudo with a big win, and then he retires.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Do we think he's actually retiring, or is that him trying to get more money?
I think he's actually going to retire because I think in the bantamweight division, Dominic Cruz is just such a staple and an icon that in order for, he called himself the Triple Crown winner, right? Because he was an Olympian. He beat Dillashaw and he beat Demetrius Johnson, right? Mighty Mouse in the 125 flyweight division before moving up the bantamweight. And so he called himself like the Triple Crown winner, but not a lot of people gave him the respect that he necessarily deserved. And so I think he knew that he needed to defeat Dominic Cruz as he came out of retirement in order for him to solidify him as like arguably the best of that division of all time. And so I can actually see him pumping the brakes, knowing that he needed to accomplish all the milestones that he did accomplish. And I think now he's done. What about you? Do you think he's coming back?
I don't think he's completely done. I could see him maybe taking a break to some of the points that you just made and let him focus on some other things. But I don't think he's completely done. I mean, I do think he's a little underrated as a fighter overall. I mean, his track record is pretty incredible.
I agree, yeah.
I don't think he's done. I think he'll find his way back for a big fight. And he did say in one of his interviews, he had some great interviews after. He did say that money. Let's see what happened.
Yeah, and in terms of matchups, based on the result of Justin defeating Tony Ferguson, now Justin is, I would assume, is next in line for Khabib. So does Dana White, if you're a promoter, does Dana White try to hype the Conor McGregor Jorge Masvidal fight, or does he try to hype the Conor McGregor Tony Ferguson fight?
Yeah, honestly, good question. I think it's definitely Gaethje and Khabib now. Obviously, Dana said as much, so that's going to happen. I think it theoretically makes sense to then do Tony Conor, and then the two winners face off each other, and you can kind of clean up, everything you need with that division. But to your point, I mean, Tony Khabib was a big matchup, and like Conor could easily have some bigger fights on there if Masvidal wants to do it or what wants to happen with him. I mean, there could be any number of huge fights for Conor. I think the one that it makes the most sense to do those two separate fights, have the winners face each other, and see who really is the true champion of that division, and then Conor can go look into some bigger name fights. But we'll see what happens. Honestly, I have no idea what they're going to do with Conor and Jorge Masvidal. Or I think those are both interesting cases from a matchmaking perspective. But
yeah, I know, and I guess the downside of UFC too is the fight that we saw this last previous. I personally didn't see this fight, but it was actually a UFC fight night, so it wasn't one of the actual UFC pay-per-view opportunities, but it was more so just one of those like ad hoc pull fighters together. Let's see what they do. And I think the main event for that was Anthony Smith versus Glover Teixeira.
Yeah.
That was I didn't see that fight, but I heard about it. I mean, I actually heard the derogatory comments towards UFC, like aimed at Dana White, and how could you let someone continue to fight 5 rounds when they look like that? I mean, he was in some really bad shape. So I'm not sure if you saw that or not, but I definitely wanted to highlight it.
I think I saw mainly the highlights of that one and most of the card. But that was another good card for a fight night. But yeah, I mean, a gruesome. The other fight, I mean, just a gruesome card overall. The one fight I saw, I forget the fighter's name, maybe Benitez or something, one of the earlier fights, he sliced open his shin to the point where his shin bone was basically exposed.
Oh, my gosh.
And he fought, that happened in the first round, and he fought the next 2 rounds with that. Like, oh my gosh, I honestly, for viewers, I would not necessarily recommend pictures of that. Like, it was gruesome. And then, like you said, I mean, the Anthony Smith fight, he lost teeth in the middle of the fight, and he's taking them out of his mouth and handing them to the referee to get them out of the octagon at one point. And then, to your point, just getting absolutely mauled for 5 rounds when they easily could have stopped the fight after 3.
For sure.
5. I mean, just a crazy card overall. And then you had last night another UFC fight night. Not quite as deep of a card or quite as big a names, but a decent main event with Alistair Overeem and I guess Will Harris, I forget his first name, which is a crazy story about how his I think his stepdaughter was murdered in the last year, because he was actually scheduled to fight at the DC event with Alistair Overeem that I went to, where Rosenstruik replaced him and knocked out Overeem. But that was around the time his daughter got, I guess, abducted and killed. Ultimately, she was in that December 2019 timeframe. So this was his first fight back after that. Unfortunately, he did lose to Alistair Overeem, but just a tragic story there, and good to see him back in the fight game. But
yeah, well, and I think just too, like, I mean, it really like just shows you these events. I mean, just these last 3 main UFC events, like the brutality of the sport. And I was having a conversation with one of my old roommate in Austin, who's like a huge avid UFC fan, and we had a discussion over UFC actually buying the UFC, and so ESPN will actually debut a lot of their preliminary fights, and so ESPN has almost taken that gamble in which they can switch from Sports Center to a fight where someone can get injured and have some type of like widespread injury that's very visible to like anyone who's watching, right? And they can display that on TV. So it just kind of goes to show you like how much of a gamble it is that ESPN is showing those fights and they're not just strictly pay-per-view events or covered on another sports network. So I thought it was interesting. And I think with this summer, with all the different matchups that we had talked about, there's going to be plenty of more UFC events, whether they open it back for more audience or whether they just keep them in Florida and they continue kind of operating at the pace that you're doing right now. We're definitely in store for some good UFC matchups. But
yeah, I'm excited. And Fight Island, man, I'm ready for Fight Island.
Yeah,
Island ready to rock in a month or so. But yeah, I think they're gonna be able to move to Vegas for this next the next card, which is in 2 weeks. And fight their headquarters, which will be easy for them, and then Fight Island for international fights in June. So I think it's going to be fun if they can put all this together. But yeah, props to Dana White for getting all this on, though. Like you said at the beginning, like it's great to have some kind of sports back, and it also kind of sets the table for how other organizations can operate within this. Because I mean, for 249, they did test positive for the virus. Were able to prove that their kind of control system and their whole infrastructure for preventing, spread was in place well enough that they could, still move on with the event. And, I think that sets the tone for how other organizations can hopefully kind of mirror some of what they've done, and let's get sports back on. So props to Dan.
That's a good point. And speaking of sports, we also have another sport we're planning to talk about. Insert Cy. He can come off mute now. For the remainder of our podcast, we wanted to walk through, with the 2020 NFL schedule recently being released, right, as of last week. We all had the opportunity to take a look at all the schedule matchups for each week and kind of pick our top 5 matchups. And we wanted to kind of go down in the list and kind of go through which ones seem, the most important or the most crucial during the course of the season, and also like the ones that you were most excited to see. So Cy, welcome back. Maybe you can kick us off with number 5 and how you created the list in general.
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you just fine.
Awesome. So just want to make sure, when I'm mute, coming back, we got to get the ball rolling here. I'm excited, super excited about the schedule. There's actually way more matchups than I'm normally excited for this season. 1, probably because I've been lacking sports in my life, and 2, because there's so many more teams that are intriguing and interesting to me. I think this is the most exciting like groups of teams that we've seen in the NFL in a long time, because there's just so many new storylines and so many changes. Brady going to the Buccaneers just kind of changed the platform of the entire NFL, because I think we came in the last 10 to 20 years expecting the Patriots to, be the top team in the AFC, or at least in the top 2. And now all of a sudden the AFC is kind of wide open. The NFC's got all these new young players. I'm just excited to see it. So with that being said, and I guess I teed it up perfectly with the young players, my number 5 matchup that I'm most excited to watch is going to be the Bengals versus the Dolphins in week 13. I'm super excited to watch Burrow versus Tua Tagovailoa. Both as rookies. I almost call them freshmen because I'm still thinking of them at college breath. These two guys, and they would have probably been your potential fight for the number 1 pick if Tua never got hurt. And it's crazy to me, because if you told me a year ago or like a few years back that the Dolphins would be on my list of top 5 teams and the Bengals would be on my list of top 5 teams that I'm excited to watch in a season, I would be laughing my ass off at you. I would be so surprised by that. And right now I'm so excited about these teams, because I think they have a really bright future with their new quarterbacks. And I think it's really going to set the stage for a lot of great matchups between these two guys. You could potentially see this turning into like your future Brady Manning kind of matchup for the next 10 to 15 years. So fingers crossed that's what it does turn into. And that's kind of why I had it at number 5. So that's that. And I'm going to move on to, I guess, Ev, if you want to take number 4.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off you because I'm looking back at my list, which I've made. I guess it's been over a week now since the schedule came out, and I don't know if I put it in order or if I didn't. Anyway, but I'll make it easy because the Dolphins and Bengals was on my list as well. And I mean, to your same reasons, I'm still not that excited about the teams necessarily. Because I don't think the Dolphins necessarily, other than Tua, added a ton of really exciting young players. I mean, more some foundational pieces in the draft. But I mean, obviously, just like you don't always, get many opportunities to see, 1 and 2 in the draft face each other, both as quarterbacks. So I'm just excited to see what happens there, assuming that Tua is the starter by that point. And it's pretty late in the season. I think it's 13. I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but I think it's week 13. So you got to think that by that point, Tua will be starting if he's not from day one. But yeah, should be fun for sure.
I would like to clarify. When I said it, I wasn't necessarily saying that these two teams are going to be great already. I'm more saying it in terms of like future excitement, excitable value. And I definitely think the Bengals are in a better position immediately to succeed with Burrow and like their foundation on offense. I think they need to make some improvements on defense. Miami definitely still has a long way to go, but it's more purely focused on the two quarterbacks and them as rookies. So that's why I had it at 5. But yeah, I can definitely see why you're excited about it as well. Zach, what you got at 5?
So my 5 is bringing it down to the NFC South. Week 1, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers go to the New Orleans Saints and they play in the Superdome, the loud Superdome. This is going to be Brady's first time in a new uniform. It's going to be otherworldly for people who have just been so used to, for like the last 15, 20 years, seeing him in blue and red. And I think this is going to be really interesting to see the newly improved Tampa Bay offense go against the just the offensive juggernaut of the New Orleans Saints. And I think it's going to be interesting just because I love watching Brady versus Breeze, two of our most iconic quarterbacks in history, face off. I mean, what a moment in history right there. And I just want to make sure, I'm in the front row seats watching it. So that's my number 5.
I guess when's the last time do we know when Brady and Breeze have faced off? I can't imagine it has been that recent. Do we know? Has it even been in the last few years? I don't think it has.
It's been a while. I remember not last season, but the season before that, we had the Kansas City Chiefs, versus the New England Patriots, and then the Patriots won to advance to the Super Bowl versus the Los Angeles Rams and the Saints. And those were like undisputably the best 4 teams, but unfortunately the Saints weren't able to go and meet. Like it wasn't able to have like a Brady Breeze Super Bowl that I was hoping for.
Because of the call, guys, the pass interference, the one that set up the review for pass interferences, if you guys remember correctly. And that will stick to me, but I'll talk about that a little bit later because that might be coming up. I'll move on to number 4. This pick is going to include a team that Zach, with his blasphemy, did not include this team in his top 10 teams coming into the season some way, somehow. But I'm going to have the Packers at number 4 facing the 49ers in week 9. I'm very excited about this NFC championship rematch that they had last year. I think the Packers have been getting slept on a lot. I think they're getting a lot of disrespect as a team that won 13 games last season and held their own. They had a first-year head coach in Matt LaFleur and managed to put the pieces together. I'm also really intrigued by this team's chemistry and dynamic this year because they drafted Jordan Love in the first round. They moved up to get him. I'm really curious to see how that's going to impact Aaron Rodgers' mentality towards the team and how he responds to that. Something in me tells me that Aaron Rodgers is going to come back and have an exceptional season to kind of prove all the haters wrong, because I think a lot of people have been sleeping on him, even though he is arguably the best quarterback of the last 10 to 15 years. That might be hard to dispute given the fact that even though he's been hurt a little bit in recent history, I don't know if you guys remember, but that guy was easily the scariest person on anyone's schedule for several years at a time, if you just look a few years back. So I think he's going to come back and show everybody that he's still got steam left in the tank, because I don't think he really regressed that much last year. I think he was just trying to fit into a new offense and was missing Devontae Adams, which was a big playmaker in their offense. So I think the Packers are going to come back and give the Niners a run for their money in that game. I also am excited to see the dynamic with the Niners this year because they had some changes on the defensive front. They're moving forward with Garoppolo. We're going to see a new run scheme because they traded away a few of their running backs. And we're going to see another year with Shanahan after leading the number one team in the NFC and almost the Super Bowl champion. So very excited about the NFC rematch at number 4. Ev, you're up.
You think they're going to score more than 7 points this time?
They ended up scoring more than 7 in the NFC Championship, didn't they?
I don't know. I thought it was like 27-7.
If they did, what
happened was the first half that it looked like a blowout, and then the second half, the Packers, if I remember correctly, made a little of noise, right?
Okay, they did. I'm thinking about the regular season matchup between the two. It was 37-8 in the regular season.
And what was it? What was it in the NFC Championship?
37-20.
Yeah. So it was better than that. But that's what I mean about them coming back with a vengeance. I'm excited for them to prove some people wrong this year. E, go ahead.
I'm going to move to week 2, right at the beginning of the season. Saints go to Las Vegas to open up the new Raiders Stadium, which might be a little less exciting if fans can't be there, obviously, depending on how things go with the NFL here. But assuming you can have fans there, I'm pumped to see football in Las Vegas, and especially the Raiders, like the perfect fit for that city. John Gruden. Admittedly, I'm not terribly excited about the Raiders, but I did like the wide receiver pickups they made in the draft. So the offense should hopefully be more fun, but mainly it's just new stadium, new city. Can't beat it. And then Drew Brees obviously coming in on Monday Night Football. You know, a good environment for it under the lights. So I'm just excited to see football in Vegas.
Yep, that's a really solid one. Yeah,
that would be interesting. Yeah, to see Henry Ruggs go up against Marshawn Lattimore too.
There you go.
In the stadium with that they will be debuting as quickly as possible. But moving on to my number 4, I have the Detroit Lions at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Week 6 matchup. The reason why I have this as an interesting matchup is this is going to be the 2 worst teams squaring off for the tank for Trevor Lawrence.
I love it.
Both teams are going to try to lose this game. It's very evident that the Detroit Lions have given up on Matt Stafford, and both of these teams will not only be undisputably be the worst teams in the NFL this year, but they're both going to be going for one man only, and that guy's name is Trevor Lawrence, quarterback for the Clemson Tigers.
So we're definitely experiencing some technical difficulties. So if you guys are watching this and all of a sudden we are changing positions on the screen, it's because we keep losing Ev and at very opportune times, might I add, because before he dropped off, I was just going to take a moment to talk about how these lists are very much supposed to be subjective because it's our favorite matchups of the year. And usually you can't really criticize someone's opinion on what they're excited about. But I'm definitely going to criticize Zach's opinion on picking the Lions and Jaguars in his top 5. I swear Zach Bakulik is our Skip Bayless or our Booger McFarland of our segment. This man's always coming in with these ridiculously hot takes, and I just don't understand why. First of all, I understand the hype behind Trevor Lawrence, but we don't even know if Trevor Lawrence is going to be the number 1 overall pick. Secondly, the Lions would be a number 1 pick over him. Oh, hold on. Let me finish. The Lions definitely are not the second worst team in the NFL by a stretch, like you're calling them out to be. They still have Matthew Stafford. They still have a good foundation at the quarterback position, and that already makes them better than. Like, there's definitely got to be worse teams than the Lions in the NFC. That's a absolute disrespect and disgrace to the Lions for you to put them in that category with the Jacksonville Jaguars. That is ridiculous, man. That is ridiculous.
I agree and disagree with Cy. Zach, I love that you threw this curveball. I'm fascinated by it.
I'm all about the curveballs. E.
I appreciate the hot takes.
I would have rather him pick the Falcons there, but I imagine they'll show up somewhere later.
They're next.
I have to say, when we started Mondays Down South, I didn't peg you as the hot takes guy, but I'm here for it. I love it.
I definitely did, but I guess this is like this here. Go ahead.
Otherwise, I agree with Cy. I'm surprised. I think by no means is it a lock, if even a probability, that those are your teams competing for 1 and 2. I mean, I think both of those teams actually have somewhat decent rosters. in some ways. I mean, and the Lions having a good quarterback, a legit quarterback, is going to make it hard for them to get that pick. But we'll carry on with.
Yeah, the only reason I'm probably going to be putting any sort of eyes on that team is because I'll probably try to pick up the Lions defense off waivers and start them in fantasy that week. That's the only reason that matchup team will even see the light of day for me. With that said, I'm moving on to number 3. This one, I just talked about bias, so I'm going to throw in one because I had to include the Colts on this list for me because I'm very excited about the season. I have the Colts versus the Ravens. They're playing November 8th. The reason this is a big matchup for me personally, and I kind of kept going back and forth. I wanted to decide whether I wanted to do Colts Ravens or Colts Titans. I'm very excited about both those matchups. The Titans specifically because I think that'll be the battle of the AFC South this year, and I think that's where those teams prove who's going to come out of the South. But the reason I picked the Ravens is because I truly believe with what Chris Ballard has done, with us adding the pieces that we've added, with the draft that we've had, we are truly a team that can compete in the AFC. I think the Ravens are the hardest team in the AFC, or the best team in the AFC that we're playing this year. And I think that's the game where we can go out there and make a stamp and make a mark and say, hey, look, we're a real deal in the AFC and pay attention to us. I'd compare this very, very much so to last year when we played Kansas City in Kansas City and beat them. And then all of a sudden people started taking the Colts without Andrew Luck seriously. And then we had all those injuries and, kind of fell off the face of the earth. But I think the Ravens are when we can go out and, again, make people say, hey, wait, the Colts are no joke. Like, let's pay attention to their coaching and their GM and all these, young guys that they have on their roster and they put together. So I'm very excited about that matchup. And I'm excited to see us play the MVP of last year and, kind of make that impact. I also think we'll see a little bit of regression from the Ravens this year, not because I don't believe in Harbaugh. He's already proven me wrong plenty of times, and not because I don't believe in Lamar Jackson, but because I believe that they may have played a little bit above what their potential it was last year, purely because I think teams will start figuring out a little bit more how to kind of handle that offense, because I think that was a very new system to them with the way Lamar played. So I do think they'll regress just a tad bit. But yeah, I'm excited about that matchup. Cuddy.
Nice. My number 3 is going to be Chiefs-Ravens Monday Night Football, Week 3, September 28th. Obvious reasons, doesn't need too much of an intro. Obviously, Mahomes, Lamar, Monday Night Football. That game was great last year up in Arrowhead. Although I think it was a late comeback by Baltimore to make it close. I think if Lamar keeps this up, I think this could turn into, obviously, Lamar Mahomes is very different than Brady Manning on many levels, but it could be that matchup that once you see it, almost every year, that it's just like a mouth-watering matchup year in, year out for the next 10 years or so, starting from last year. So looking forward to that one. You get that Monday night feel too, which reminds me of when, a little different because they're the same conference, but when you had that Chiefs-Rams, just crazy explosive point-scoring bonanza Monday Night Football. So I think we could get something similar there in week 3. You
got the regular season MVP versus the Super Bowl MVP, and what a lot of people thought was going to be the AFC Championship matchup last year, and did come to fruition because of the Titans win. But so that will be very exciting. Good point, Ev. Zach, you're up next.
Cool, guys. My number 3 is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers once again traveling, another NFC South matchup, traveling to the Mercedes-Benz Dome of the new Falcons Stadium. I think this is going to be an interesting matchup. This is week 15 because despite my biases, this is great redemption for the Atlanta Falcons. We don't play the New England Patriots this year, but we get Brady again. We get him twice. And so based on the 28-3 debacle, it would be nice to see Matt Ryan get some type of, clearance to his name here and to beat Brady once, hopefully twice in the NFC South, which is unlikely, but the best chance we would get is in home territory. I think that would be an interesting matchup. And the Falcons are going to bring their fake crowd noise to try to, push them to their limits here, which is now, the NFL was talking about legalizing that because of everything that's going on. So I want to take a chance and just say that for all those people that were bashing the Atlanta Falcons for fake noise, allegedly fake noise, joke's on them now. The NFL is exploring that idea. So that's my week 3. I think that's going to be a fun matchup between the two quarterbacks.
Zach, I promise you I'm not trying to roast you, man, but you keep setting me up for this. All right, first of all, I was already going to bring this up and you beat me to the punch. There's a very big difference between putting in artificial crowd noise when people are allowed to be at your games and putting in artificial crowd noise when people might be self-isolated and might not be allowed to go to the stadium. completely different things. So yes, even though the Falcons integrated it first, they integrated it when they were allowed to have fans, and fans weren't showing up because their team wasn't good enough to get fans in the stadium. That is why it was illegal, not because fans weren't allowed to be there and they're putting in crowd noise. So let's throw that out there. But I am glad you touched on that, because I have heard that Goodell is considering in the streams adding noise. And I remember someone telling me that, and my first response was, man, now the Falcons are going to be real competitors, because it'll mean they'll feel right at home with artificial noise. So maybe we shouldn't sleep on the Falcons in the NFC
We're
South.
just beating people to the punch.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't sleep on the Falcons in the NFC South. I do agree with the matchup of Ryan versus Brady again. I'm sure they'll have a real chip on their shoulder. I'm sure those guys are really pissed off. And honestly, I'm sure that'll be a very big driving factor this year for them to beat the Patriots, regardless of whether the Buccaneers, whether the Falcons compete or not in terms of the playoffs. Like, I'm sure every time they play each other, they're going to try to prove a point and try to keep Brady and those Bucs out of the playoffs. I think that alone would make people very happy in Falcons land. So that's very true. Number 2 for me was actually, I believe, number 5 for Zach. It's the Saints vs. Bucs week 1. The reason that it's number 2 for me isn't just Brady Breeze. Obviously, that's a huge factor in it. The fact that the matter is there's this colossal change in the NFL with, in a lot of people's minds, one of the greatest, if not the greatest quarterback in some people's opinion, changing teams, the team that he played with and the team that he won all these Super Bowls with and going to the Buccaneers. That is already a huge, colossal impact. But week 1, we get to see him playing in the Superdome, which is one of the most iconic stadiums in the NFL, and kind of setting the tone for what we should expect to see in the NFC, because I imagine a lot of people are coming into the season thinking the Saints and the Buccaneers are up at the top of their lists of teams that are going to be competitive. The Saints, we've seen what they've been capable of the last couple of years in the NFC. It'll be really interesting to see how Brady's going to fare with these new weapons that he has in Godwin and Evans, and getting Gronk back, which was a massive move for him because Gronk's been such a big part of his success recently, and also, integrating that run game. I think that will really set the tone for the rest of the season for him. I'm not saying the Buccaneers need to win to make that statement, but if they go to the Superdome and win, then all of a sudden people are going to be like, oh crap, like this is a real thing. This isn't just something we've been speculating on. So I'm really excited about that. And the other point that I want to make about that is just like how iconic it is that the 2 players last year that were competing for the all-time passing touchdown record are now in the same division, 2 of the GOATs playing each other twice a year. And that's going to also set the stable for that, because Breeze and Brady are still competing for that all-time passing touchdown record, and they're going to be playing each other twice a year. That's crazy, kind of crazy to think about. And I think even though Breeze last year was definitely the better quarterback in terms of him as an individual, I'm sure it's going to put a chip on Brady's shoulder. So I'm really excited about that. So that's my number 2. I'm going to pass it over to Ev for his number 2.
My number 2 is actually the same. We have very similar lists overall today. To be honest, nothing to add to that. I mean, obviously Brady Breeze, and obviously the Bucs now being a huge factor in that division. It's actually a huge divisional game as well. I mean, just, all that played into it right at the beginning of the season. Not much else to say on it, but definitely should be a fun one. So Zach, I'll just pivot back over your way.
All right, so guys, my number 2 is the Eagles at the Cowboys, a big NFC East matchup in Week 16. Now, the reason why this one was highly prioritized on my list is because knowing the NFC East year over year, it comes down to usually 2 or 3 teams that are right around that 8-7, 7-8, that type of 9-6 record, and they're going to be competing for the division. And we know there's not going to be any wild card teams out of the NFC East, right? And so this matchup has clear playoff implications, and it's in Dallas. It's going to be a great matchup between 2 huge rivals, and I think that matchup will be very interesting just because we only have 1 or 2 more games in the season, and there's not, everything's in writing here, and there's not really time for mistakes. So whatever team comes out stronger is going to be the one that most likely enters the playoffs under the NFC East. So that was my number 2. Just because of the date and time in which that game will be played.
Yep. I will say I'm glad you picked an NFC East matchup, because whether the teams are good or not, those matchups are always great because those teams hate each other so much and want to win so badly. And I do think it's going to come down to those two teams in the East this year. I don't really know how much noise the NFC East will make in the playoffs this year because I don't have a lot of confidence in any of them. But I will say this, and Ev, you might not like this, but I'm pretty impressed with what the Cowboys have done this draft with kind of how they put their team together. I think it was pretty impressive to see what they added, and I don't know. That's a good looking team, man. CeeDee Lamb with Amari Cooper, Ezekiel Elliott, Dak Prescott, a great offensive line, and that's a pretty good looking offense right there. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen. And of course, the Eagles with Carson Wentz, if he can stay healthy, they always have a chance. So
well, and that's my thing too, Size. If Carson Wentz gets hurt, Jalen Hurts is going to be stepping in and filling some big shoes. So we don't know what's going to happen. I just know that matchup in itself is going to be very exciting, and it has clear playoff implications.
Very, very good point.
As good as the Cowboys look on paper, to your point, Siam, I mean, they looked that great on paper last year, the year before. Well, they always look that great on paper.
They were, though. I mean, I'm not sitting here saying that they were like some dominant force, but they were a good team, especially 2 years ago. They looked good on paper, and I think they exceeded expectations. Like I definitely think they have a chance to be good. They play more of a more like the old school ground and pound kind of play, which is why you don't see big numbers. But they win games, and I don't fault them for that either. Because if you have Ezekiel Elliott, he's going to be the focal point of my offense. But I think adding Lamb to that picture is kind of scary because you already had Cooper balling out with Dak. You already have Zeke being able to tear up the ground game. You have an offensive line that's giving them space, and then all of a sudden you add what some people considered was arguably the best receiver coming out of the draft this year, and they got him later than the other two. So that's pretty impressive. I don't know. We'll see. You might be right, but I'm still excited to see what they're capable of this year. I'm going to move on to my number one. This one was actually super easy for me. There was no going back and forth on this one for me. It's Chiefs Saints. Week, I don't know which week, but September 28th, they play each other. It's still pretty early in the season, but quite frankly, I think these are the two best teams in the NFL. I think it's the best team in each conference playing each other. I think this very likely could be the Super Bowl matchup. And honestly, I'm just excited to watch two extremely dynamic offenses with these amazing offensive coordinators and head coaches and Sean Payton and Andy Reid drawing up plays against each other. Drew Brees and Patrick Mahomes, two of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, like right now, playing each other, and it's been like kind of the passing of the torch too, right? Because Mahomes is taking over now as the best quarterback in the NFL, and it's from people like Peyton to Brady to Brees to now all of a sudden you're seeing Mahomes taking that torch. So getting to see these last couple of years of these GOATs that we've grown up watching, and then the new schoolers playing each other, I think is a really special thing to think about, because it's almost like, how many matchups of these do you get? Like, think about the classic days where you'd watch like the Brett Favre's versus the Peyton Mannings or the Tom Brady's. You only had a small segment of those matchups because one player was retiring while the new one was entering their prime. And I just think you got to really appreciate those little moments. And I truly believe these two teams could make a run for it, and we could see a Super Bowl between these two. Because if you guys remember our top 10 rankings, I believe all of us had them either as our top two or top three teams. So that was an easy pick for me.
All right. We've dropped the call again, folks. So this is going to be fun to piece together. I think we're on the 10th time we've had to do this or something. But anyway, we're going to jump back into it here. I have the same number one, Saints Chiefs. I actually have it at the end of the season in week 15, late December. But I just obviously potential Super Bowl preview, Brees Mahomes, should be a shootout, should be a ton of fun. And it could be interesting if we get that there and then the Super Bowl like 2 months later, two quick matchups between them. It would be a blast, but I'm not going to go into too much detail here to try and hope we can get this segment in, Zach. So close this out.
All right, guys, and my number one is the Chiefs at the Ravens, I believe. It's Monday Night Football in September. This matchup, and I know both of you had touched on it earlier, but this is what ideally we thought we were going to see in the AFC Championship from last year. And the Ravens, obviously had the best record in the NFL last year, and they were 14-2 before playoff time. One of those two losses came to the Chiefs last year, and it came in overtime. So I would love to see this matchup again, especially with the Chiefs coming off a Super Bowl victory. seeing them go against the hybrid nature of the Ravens offense and having defense or giving defenses the opportunity to have a second round with it, right? Like I know Sai had mentioned, this is a long off season. There are going to be a lot of teams that are studying this offense, trying to break it down and shut it down as quickly as they can. And so I think that'll just be a great matchup between John Harbaugh and Andy Reid, as they almost have like this chess match and trying to figure out, outsmart the other. So that's my number one matchup for 2020.
One note that I want to point out about this is, and I really truly realized this when we were making this list, because, for example, an honorable mention for me would have been the Saints 49ers, because that's another matchup that was absolutely incredible last year. It was a shootout and it came down to who had the ball last. And I think it was like a 40-40 game or something like that, something in that frame. Last thing I want to say was the Saints have an incredibly hard schedule. They're playing the 49ers, the Chiefs, the Ravens, all outside of their conference, which are arguably the three best teams. And then they're also playing the Brady and the Buccaneers in their conference twice. So I just want to say that one last time. With that being said, we've been cut off enough times that I think we should just sum it up. One last thought. Last two episodes of The Last Dance tonight. Super excited about that. Always a pleasure. Viewers, thank you as always. Zach, you got any last notes? And we'll end it.
That's it. Thanks everyone that subscribed. We're actually up to 15 subscribers. I don't know who subscribed. I don't know if it was some of the folks we sent around from last week's, but shout out everyone that subscribes. Keep subscribing. Hit the notification bell and the likes. It supports the channel a lot. Zach, hurry up and close before the Skype.
No, thanks guys. Another fun segment. You are watching Mondays Down South. We'll see you next week.